Yeah, my name is McCaughan, and great to see you all here, and thank you for coming along. My wife and I, we run a little business in New Zealand that does mountain flying adventure holidays for pilots from all around the world. And we've been coming to Oshkosh for probably 20 years, so it's always great to see a lot of familiar faces and people that have been out to New Zealand, and to see another group of you here, people that have probably come to New Zealand one day. So yeah, welcome to all of you. So a few days ago I did a talk on mountain flying. Today I'm going to talk more about airstrips and off-airboard operations. So just as a bit of an introduction, put a couple of slides up from the mountain flying market. We're in Hangar B if anybody wants to come and see us. That's our flying environment. Now, my real job is I'm a sheep farmer, and sheep and beef, we're about 8,500 merino sheep and 500 beef cattle that we look after. But the reason I put those merino sheep up there is partly to talk about what you wear when you're in the backcountry and what you wear when you're flying. So those are merino sheep. And how many of you own any merino wool garments or wear merino wool? Oh, very good. That's quite a high proportion of you. So, yeah, merino is the very best clothing that you can wear when you're flying. How many of you know some of its technical properties that make it specifically technically appropriate for wearing in the cockpit? Can anybody tell me that? Yeah.
Fine fabric.
Yes.
Doesn't burn, keep you warm with sweat.
And it's completely flameproof and fireproof. That's one. Yeah. You got the others?
Keep you warm when you sweat.
Yeah, if you get wet, it gives off heat. Opposite one is that if you're in a humid, hot and sticky place, it won't be humid, hot and sticky against your skin. It wicks moisture away from your skin. The other reason is if you're travelling, you've got limited clothing, you can wear merino for a long time, days and days. It doesn't smell. It doesn't get all smelly like polypropylene. So just a merino shirt. I've been wearing for a month without washing it.
Now I know why.
Yeah, they're starting to supply to astronauts and firefighters and bombs. Yeah, so that's just a little bit of an introduction on what to wear when you're flying and what to wear in the background. And merino, of course, comes in many layers. And we just sold quite a bit of wool this season to a US company called Bramlin, and all they make is women's bikinis, underwears and bras out of merino. So you can start right from against the skin, then the mid layer and the outer layer. That's the stuff to wear. Yeah, today we're going to talk more about strip flying and off-airboard operations. And there'll be a few people that will be maybe a little bit surprised that most of the photographs and things I'm going to put up here are just very ordinary aeroplanes. We're not talking about hypercuts with great big tyres or special style aeroplanes. This is just your ordinary run-of-the-mill 172 flying school aeroplane. And this photo is from our earlier days. The only modification we've made since is taking the wheel caps off. It is, if you're doing a reasonable amount of backcountry stuff, it is a good idea to take the wheel caps off. They are a little bit of a liability. But, you know, with the correct techniques in places that you are familiar with and knowledgeable about, wheel caps on is fine too. So, some airstrips are places that people have kind of set up for aeroplane operations. But a lot of strips are just a pasture or a paddock or an alfalfa field that you can land an aeroplane on. And when you're operating in and out of those places, it may be that there's never been an aeroplane in or out of there before, but with knowledge of the field and the surface, you can use it quite well. And it's just going into a little sheep pasture there. So my definition of an airstrip is a place that you can sometimes safely operate an aircraft from. And the reason I say that is when you're flying in and out of strips and operating in and out of strips, you should never go there with the expectation that you are going to land, because they're not airports, they're not maintained. In some conditions they're totally unsuitable. So each time you go to an airstrip, you need to assess, can I operate this aircraft in and out of this strip today? So yeah, they're not airfields, there's not maintenance stuff on them. Maybe nobody's ever landed there before. And, you know, farm strips might be a dead cow lying in the middle of it. You know, the farmer might have left a set of arrows in the long grass. So you've got to be aware of the types of hazards and conditions that can be particular to the strip you go in and out of. New Zealand hill country has always been managed with you know, fencing and fertiliser to grow sheep pasture, and most of those pastures need a little bit of solid fertiliser every second or third year, and that's put on with an aircraft. So all around New Zealand hill country there's these little tiny ag strips that are just used once every second year or so for putting fertiliser on. And you can operate GA aircraft in and out of them, but you need to be very conscious of the conditions on the day. There's a strip that's got a nice downhill slope to take off, and it's into some terrain that opens up quite nicely. It's a beach. Beaches are a death trap for aeroplanes. If anything goes wrong and the tide's coming in, it can get quite stressful. The other side of that story though is that beaches can make a fantastic, long, smooth, hard area to operate in now. So it's about assessing the conditions on the day and operating wisely. One of the wise things you can do with beach operations is to land as soon as possible after high tide. So the tides come in, it starts going out, you've got just enough room to operate. If you land then, for many, many hours afterwards, the tide's still going out and the runway's getting bigger all the time. If you land at low tide, the tide's turning around, the runway's going to get smaller all the time you're there. So you know, if a lot of beaches you can operate 2 to 3 hours either side of high tide. So if you get in as soon as possible after high tide, all the time you're there, the runway's going to be getting bigger. The grass on that strip's reasonably draggy. When you've got strips with grass or long grass, again, it helps if you've got a bit of farming knowledge, because long grass that's dry and thin doesn't create that much drag. You can have grass that's 12 inches high or more. If it's dry and thin, it's not very draggy. But that green lush grass like that, and 10 or 12 inches high, that'll stop you. So you need to be a little bit knowledgeable on how your aeroplane, and that kind of green lush grass, that gets really draggy with wheel tanks on. So your typical strips of farm field, pasture, hay paddock. Hay paddocks are good. Anywhere that farmers make hay or silage or anything like that, they mow it. And if farmers are going to be mowing it, they hate hitting rocks with their mower. So they tend to roll it nice and flat, pick up the rocks. So alfalfa fields that are mowed for hay, then, you know, you've got beaches, mud flats, sandbars, gravel bars. You start getting into that sort of stuff, you may be a little bit out of the 172 territory and more looking at it come. But backcountry strips and small grass airfields and rock dusting. And down the bottom, you know, we've always got roads, and they can be quite good. There's a strip high, well, not that high up in the mountains actually. One of the things that we're lucky with in New Zealand is that our mountains are tall and rugged, but they mostly start from sea level. And that means that the valley floors are not very high. So generally where we're landing and taking off, there's not much of a density altitude problem. Most of our airstrips are 2,000 feet or less in altitude. So yeah, that strip here I think is only about 1,800 or 2,000 feet. But the terrain around it goes straight to 10,000 feet. So you need to be competent and familiar in mountain flying and working in amongst that terrain to operate in and out there. That strip's actually one that's regularly used commercially by a local tourism service. The name of that strip is Siberia. There's another beach. We've got wheel pants off now. We've finally learned. That beach is curved. Also, that picture's quite interesting. Look at the wheel track of the 172. See the tyres going into the sand a bit? That amount of wheel mark is about on the limit for a 172. If the tyre's making any more of a wheel mark than what that is, you will be stuck. Yeah. I guess on that little beach down there, when you land on a beach or any strip, people are often fine on the landing. It's when they start taxiing around they get in trouble. And if you land in a place that you're not familiar with, or a beach that you don't know very well, often the best thing to do is you land, the aeroplane rolls out, when you come to a stop, turn the thing off and pop out. have a good walk around and figure out where and how you're going to taxi. Because in my experience, most of the time when you get stuck on a beach or a strip or drive into a rabbit hole or do something else silly is when you're taxiing. So land, roll out, stop and get out and have a walk around. Every time you land on a beach, you should go for a good walk up and down the beach, because that teaches you about how that beach is laid out in terms of hard sand, soft sand, bits of gravel. Spend time, any strips that you use regularly, spend time walking around the place, because that's how you learn where the rough bits and the good bits and the soft bits and the holes and all that sort of thing. So,
people that drive off-road Jeeps, they can inflate their tires a little bit when they get into soft soil for a little bit better traction. Is that anything that's ever been attempted to help?
I've never thought of that, but my off-road experience tells me that the reason you do that off-road is to increase the surface area of tyre in contact with the terrain to get more traction, but it also increases the rolling resistance. Now, I don't think it would be a good idea with an aeroplane at all. I think the aeroplane, you're probably better to stick to the standard tyre pressure. Now, that's with a normal aircraft and normal tyres. When you get into those big Alaskan bush fields and things, that's probably different. But yeah, four-wheel drive, you go to get more surface area on the ground. So some skills that you need to operate safely in and out of strips. Strips are often surrounded by interesting terrain, and so you need the ability to fly accurately and position the aircraft accurately, and you need to be able to do that without having to think about it too much. So, being very familiar with low flight, slow flight, operating close to terrain if the strips are in the mountains. So, in a 172, typically, while we're looking around the strip, we would use a configuration of 20 degrees of flat, 65 knots, and just enough power to maintain level flight. So that's around 1700 RPM. So 65 knots with 20 degrees of flat, that makes a Cessna 172 basically into a big microlight. You can fly around low level and slowly, and you can turn in quite a confined space without having to pull any kind of an aerobatic manoeuvre or use any significant bank angle. The turning circle of a 172 with 20 degrees of flaps and 65 knots is remarkably small without much of a bank angle. And operating in the circuit around the strip and amongst terrain, that's the configuration. You need a bit of an understanding of surfaces and how they look from the air, and that's gained by experience, and part of that experience is gained by all the walking around you do when you get out of an aeroplane, and you start to understand what you can see from the air and what you can determine about the surface by what you see from the air. And just local knowledge of conditions and surfaces. Of course, in our part of the world, farming knowledge and agricultural knowledge is very useful, because you know how a farmer's likely to live in field. Knowledge of your aircraft and its tolerance of all surfaces and conditions. So, obviously, aeroplane with wheel pants is way less tolerant. Get the wheel pants off, you can do a bit more. And in an aeroplane like the 172, a skilled operator can keep most of the weight off the nose wheel most of the time, and that makes the aeroplane a lot more tolerant. The main gear on 172 is pretty rugged, and you can drive over a rock or through a rabbit hole and you're not going to hurt anything. But if you have a lot of weight on the nose wheel and go through a rabbit hole, you can really do some damage. So part of it's, operator skill. And then the ability to judge the effects of terrain and wind and density, altitude, and aircraft performance on how you can get in and out of any particular strip on a day. I use a technique called stalking the strip. Now, that means that you're not committed to landing on it, you're not in any hurry to land on it, and when you get down, you don't taxi around. So if I go to a field that's just a farm pasture, and I've never been to it before, I will use that stalking technique, and I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. But this basically means that you don't go diving in there without really thinking about it. So that's landing on a beach that's got quite a curve to it. That's a good solid beach. That one, the sand is reliable, nice and hard, but you do have to work around that curve. And that particular beach is extremely remote, so you don't want to come to grief or get stuck there. It's in a very remote location. I went there during COVID. I had some friends down there who were on a yacht, and my wife and I, we decided we would go down and visit them for the day and take them some fresh vegetables, fresh supplies. They'd been sailing in a very remote place for a couple of weeks, and so it happened to be the right weather and the right day. The chances of pulling this all off were about 10%, because to visit them for a day, we needed a low tide in the morning and then another low tide in the evening to depart. But because we were there for the day, we also needed to get the aeroplane above the high tide mark. So we landed there, and I'd take some strips of plywood with me in the back of the aeroplane, and then I laid it out on the soft sand. We pulled the aeroplane up above the high tide. I went away sailing for the day. It was a tricky mission, but we got it done. So yeah, operating around the strip, it's like basic attitude flying. So your eyes are out the window, and you're setting the aeroplane up in a speed configuration, and you can, a lot of strips you'll maybe be amongst terrain, be making a 500-foot circuit, and some places you end up with the circuits of figure 8, or you've got to work out for yourself what's practical given the instructions. And even in farm fields, there'll be a big row of trees down one side maybe, and some power wires, and so you need to be happy operating your aeroplane at low level around fine space, and doing it pretty much by feel and sound. Especially when you're amongst the hills and the wind, I don't generally recommend guide approaches. You might be in a stabilised power-on approach. So low-flying, slow-flying terrain follow. That configuration for paddock inspection at 20 degrees of flat and 65 knots. A lot of room. You can take a very heavy load down that beach. There's some backcountry cabins there. I flew a lot of building materials off that beach, and in a 206 with sheets of roofing on, iron stoves, everything including the kitchen sink. So, back to this stalking the strip. Okay, we've arrived over a paddock that we've never landed in before, and maybe nobody's ever landed in before. How do we go about it? So, you know, the first thing is taking time. And our commitment to landing there is very considered. You've gathered quite a bit of information and checked out the area around the strip pretty thoroughly. So, come over, hit the strip for a start at 500 feet. And we need to check all the S's. So, the speed and direction of the wind. Now, one of the most fantastic uses of GPS in mountain flying has got nothing to do with finding your way around, because often you should be doing that by looking out the window. But the GPS is a fantastic aid in that you know your ground speed, and so by noting the difference between your ground speed and your airspeed, you know what the wind's doing. And it's amazing how accurate that is. You could be on approach to a strip and have, say, just 3 or 4 knots of tailwind, which can make quite a difference on a short strip. And if you glance at your airspeed and at your ground speed on the GPS, you will pick up just 3 knots of tailwind. It's quite accurate. So the S is the size of the strip, the shape and the slope, the surface, the surrounds, and taking into account the surrounds, your escape route where you want to overshoot or go around. So we've flown over the strip at 500 feet, and we've assessed all of these things, and we figure out whereabouts are we going to make a downwind and base and final, what kind of a cap, given the terrain, are we going to use to approach the strip. We've figured out where the wind is, so we know which direction our flying is going to be. And we've looked at the size and shape of the strip, because it could be a very funny, oblong, funny shaped pattern, but we're going to pick a centre line across that we're going to use. So we try and do as much of that as possible while we're orbiting. We're orbiting at 500 feet over this strip. Once we've figured out all those things, we want to go and make a low approach and go around. And as part of that, we may fly along that centre line that we've picked to use at sort of 15 or 20 feet above the ground to make an assessment of the surface. And so this is what I call stalking the strip. You're not just rolling in there and landing, you're making quite a detailed assessment of everything around the strip and the surface. So that's where we're using that configuration of 20 degrees of flat and 65 knots. We've picked a centre line. Very important actually to try as much as possible to fly a fairly standard pattern around the strip. Now often it's not possible, but at least try and intercept the extended centre line of the path that you've chosen. Try and intercept that a little way out on final, because if you've got a paddock with no defined centre line or airstrip for you to use, you've picked one out because of the size and shape of the paddock and wind direction. It's quite important often that you fly out your paddock line. The easiest way to get accurately hidden onto that centre line is to pick it up and get the aeroplane stabilised on the centre line a little way out. How many airline pilots in the room here? Yeah. One of the interesting things about strip flying is that, you know, the airlines want a stabilised approach, and it's actually one of the best things you can do with flying into the strip. If you've got the aeroplane on a powered, stabilised approach on the centre line when you're on the short final, it's the way to go. You know, there's some strips where you've got to make a funny curved approach around some terrain and you're not really all sorted out until the last minute. But most strips you can get sorted out a bit sooner and earlier, and that makes it easy. When you've made your assessment from higher up, you've picked an escape route. So that escape route ideally wants to be downhill. So if you're in amongst sloping terrain, you may have a strip that's got quite a bit of slope on it, and you're going to land uphill. Yeah, even though you're going to land uphill, all of the surface assessment is laid downhill. So that you've got a good escape route and go around downhill. So sloping strip, you'll be making this assessment with an escape route downhill. These beaches on the west coast, while they can often be long and big and hard, quite often you're operating on off the beach and quite a crosswind, because you get that breeze coming in off the sea, especially in the afternoons. And there they are, we'll have to walk around to figure out what the surface is like. And that particular beach gets covered. You can see it just behind the people, and there's a little bit bigger gravel. If there's quite a bit of that, just stay well away from it. The wheels will get well stuck in that gravel. There's another kind of gravel on that beach which is a fine, hard sort of black gravel, and it gives a really good hard surface for the aeroplane. It's a little bit rough, but it's a good surface. So, landing, we've talked about that accurate approach, so you're on an accurate glide path to your chosen touchdown point. You're nicely on that chosen centre line that you've picked, and the approach is as slow as you can make it given the load of the aircraft and the conditions. So, you know, if you're lightly, remember, you know, the stall speed that they put in the book for your aeroplane is when it's fully loaded at max gross weight. So a lot of the time when you're very lightly loaded going into a strip, you can make a pretty slow approach. But of course, if you're in the mountains and there's any wind around and it's a bit gusty, you need to allow good margin to give yourself some controllability. So each strip and each day is a bit different. Remaining uncommitted for as long as possible. Now, on a sloping strip where you're landing uphill, some of them, once you're halfway in on the final, there is no go around, you're committed to landing. So those strips, you've got to be reasonably sure of your ability and the strip on the day. But even a lot of those uphill sloping strips, if they're on a ridge, there's often one side or the other that you can actually go around quite late and not be faced with rising terrain. A powered approach, especially where there's a bit of wind around. If you're flying a glide approach and you've got the throttle closed and you find yourself on the horizon or on the hill in the distance to line up on, and you've worked out that point because you've walked up and down the strip and picked the best line, and you know that line. And sometimes there's a bit of a compromise between wind and the best line. You might be accepting a little bit of crosswind because there's a much better line across the strip. Another thing is rolling onto a line. So a lot of flight schools and things where you learn to fly, they'll teach you that for a short takeoff that you line up on the end of the runway on the brakes and you go to full throttle and check your power, and then the takeoff starts. But in a lot of cases on a strip, you can get more use out of the available length if you line up at 90 degrees to your takeoff path and opening the throttle gently, you gain a little bit of momentum and roll onto the takeoff line so that you're already moving and the engine's already half sort of wound up at that point where you would normally be sitting with the brakes on. You can just gain a little bit by doing that. So that's rolling onto a line. Think about the use of flat. On grass operations, I think in the flight manual for a 172 it says to use 10 degrees. But if you've got a bit of long grass and you've got a lightly loaded 172, 20 degrees can be an option. Especially if you've got 108 horsepower 172. If you use 20 degrees, as soon as you get the aeroplane off the ground, if you're not trying to climb out over an obstacle, you're kind of staying in ground effect a little bit and getting straight back to that 10 degrees. So there's various techniques with flat view. The guys in like Cessna 180s, 185s with manual flat, they'll do all sorts of fancy tricks, but usually not required to be very clever. So, yeah, rotating and getting the aeroplane airborne as soon as possible. So if you've got a nice stable breeze on the nose and not too much gusting and turbulence, you can get the aeroplane airborne at a pretty low airspeed. But remember that at that speed you really haven't got an aeroplane. So airborne, check forward and gain a little bit of airspeed, and then climb away. Don't become airborne at a high nose attitude. Continue like that out of ground effect. And then accelerating to the climb speed that you want. So that may be best angle of climb if you've got obstacles at the end of the strip. Otherwise, just your normal pedestrian line. There's a typical little New Zealand backcountry strip. It's just a couple of wheel tracks in the grass. That's that kind of grass I talked about. If you've got longer dry grass, it's not very draggy. So that grass you'll operate in and out of just fine, even though it's got a bit of length on it, because it doesn't actually create that much drag. On that particular strip, you have to maintain a very accurate line. Those two wheel tracks are pretty much clear of obstacles. Get just a foot or two off them and the ground becomes very lumpy. So you need. The other interesting thing about that strip is it's not that great a strip, but it's in that valley and the wind always tends to blow up or down that valley. So most times that you go there, you've got 10 knots of wind on the nose, either way that you're landing. And, 10 or 15 knots of wind on the nose makes the airstrip an awful lot longer. It's effectively adds 40 or 50% on your length of your strip. That's a little airstrip on an offshore island up near Auckland, our biggest city. Quite a neat location. And yeah, there's an aeroplane that some people in the audience know quite well. But that was built as a strip aeroplane because I think it was the private jet of the Texas oil barons in the 30s, and they were all landing on dirt roads and places like that. So it's a pretty capable strip aeroplane. It is a little bit heavy, so not for soft ground. And it's quite hard work all the strip flying, so when you get home at the end of the day, you need a decent dinner and a couple of glasses of wine. Yeah, so that's about all I've got to say. Any questions from all of that? Yeah.
Back when you're talking about upslope and downslope and winds, is there any rule of thumb between whether or not to make a decision? If you land a downslope with a headwind or upslope with a tailwind, is it like 3 knots, 5 knots? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's a bit tricky to give a rule of thumb for that because it totally depends on the length of the strip and the aeroplane and what the wind speed is. So with a long, smooth airstrip, you can take an enormous amount of tailwind. But where the airstrips are a bit shorter, you can get into that window that I mentioned where there's a bit much tailwind to go downhill. And I think there's rules of the thumb, like 10 knots of tailwind to let 50% on your takeoff roll, that sort of thing. And then you've got to adjust that for your slope. Yeah, it is a little bit of a yes.
Does anyone want to get a website offering information and guidance on each of these streams?
No.
Wouldn't that be helpful?
Maybe not. It might get people into trouble. Because a lot of the time it's the individual on the individual game. And, I think that the best information and guidance is to go out around a few paddocks and beaches and things with an experienced person and get a bit of practice and real world experience.
How do you make a judgment call on landing on the beach in terms of the surface and support the aircraft?
Yeah, that's a good question. I probably missed that out a little bit. And it applies to an area of grass as well. I mentioned assessing the surface at 20 feet, making a low run over the surface. If if you can't satisfy yourself from that low run that the surface is suitable, the next step is to touch the wheels down, but not slow down too much. So you may be, on 172, you may be running longer than the strip at sort of 45 knots or something like that, so that you're not committed to staying down. And if you touch down on the main gear and it seems very rough, then you could open the throttle and go away again. Touch down and it seems all nice and smooth. You can choose to come around and land. And in the situation with the beach, you'll often run the wheels along at some speed, and then you can sort of feel if the sand's soft or not. Also, when you get right down low near a beach, if anybody else has been on the beach, you can see from their wheel marks, footprints, motorbikes, whatever else, what the wheel marks. If you see hard sand with a tyre mark on it, it's hardly gone in. That's a pretty good indicator. But beaches are tricky because they're all different, and even the one that we use regularly, and every time I go there, I'm still pretty careful about making an assessment of it, because if you get a big storm, you'll get patches of gravel thrown up on it. Some of those patches are soft and some are not. Big chunks of seaweed and logs. You've got to be a little bit careful with beaches. Some of them, there's some nasty ones that come down south on Stewart Island. They have patches of quicksand that you can't really see from the aeroplane. Yeah.
Is permission to land required from the landowner?
Technically, yes. Below the high tide mark in New Zealand, it's part of the ocean. But look, to be honest, I don't know exactly how the law with that works in New Zealand. There's selected remote backcountry beaches where we use regularly with aeroplanes, and it's all fine, but I'm sure if you went and landed at a public beach just outside of Auckland, there's a lot of people around, that you would be breaking some rule or told off. So I don't exactly know what the law is. Yeah. How do you know what the wind is? Well, you just need to be able to assess the wind by feeling it on your face, or watching the trees, or watching the grass, and you learn to estimate wind speeds by experience, I guess. Yeah. How do you handle wildlife? I guess that's a bit by local knowledge and experience too. Yeah, I know over here there's a lot of places where deer are quite a significant issue, aren't they? And they can run out of the trees at the last minute. And I guess that's just about, what risks you're wanting to accept or not. But I guess that low pass and paddock inspection, at least that warns the wildlife that you're around, and hopefully keeps them away in the trees. If you're buzzing up and down the strip with an aeroplane, hopefully the deer are going to head off in the other direction. In New Zealand, we often arrive at paddocks that are covered in sheep, and you can herd sheep gently off the strip with the aeroplane. The main thing with a mob of sheep is just to start on one side and make sure you've got all of them. If all of the sheep are standing off to the side of your takeoff path, they will stay there. But if you split the mob and there's some on that side and one or two get left on that side, that's quite dangerous because they all want to flock together. So just make sure you don't have sheep on both sides. That's the trick with sheep. Well, thanks very much all of you for listening, and I hope you've gained something out of that. It's a lot of fun flying around paddocks and beaches and everything, and you find somebody that knows what they're doing and go with them for a start. That's the best advice I can give them. Thank you.